The remainder of that night became a blur. All Jason remembered was waking up dripping in sweat, leaning against the closed door of his bedroom. He still had his clothes on. There was a knocking coming from somewhere. It took a moment of shaking off the disorientation for him to realize someone was at the front door. Anna stood on his porch, and she gasped when she saw Jason's haggard state. "Are you all right?" she breathed as she put a hand over her mouth. "What happened?" I don't know how to start," Jason said. "I just came from the hospital. They're keeping Dan for a while, and they pinned his reaction down to some kind of allergy. I've never seen swelling so horrible. He's conscious, thank God, and asked me to get his van." She motioned to the extermination van still sitting in the driveway. Frowning, she addressed the bigger issue. "Jason, what exactly happened in there? Tell me." He sighed. "You better come in. I couldn't tell it all standing here." They sat down at his kitchen table after Jason made some coffee. He told her everything, starting with Dan finding the nest and ending with what happened in the basement. Anna stayed silent while he spoke. Jason noticed her paying particular attention as he described the nightmare he saw. "I'm never going to get the image of all those things out of my head. Endless hordes of them, all clamoring over each other. It was like I was in another dimension or something." "Another dimension," Anna repeated. "Scientists talk about this stuff all the time, right? It sounds insane, I know, but I felt it. Like I shifted there and back. That's all I can rationalize." "And you said you saw something else there." Jason shuddered. "I could only make out the shape under all the insects, but it moved with purpose. Whatever it was, it had consciousness. From the way it was acting, I think..." He stopped, the next thought shaking him to the bone. Anna put her hand on his shoulder. "I think," he continued, "I think it was trying to break out of that world and into this one." A silence followed his statement. Jason couldn't tell if Anna was pondering what he told her or considering that he might have lost it. After a long sip of coffee, she finally spoke. "Let's say I believe you. What's your next step?" "I don't know. What can I do? Burn the house down? It probably wouldn't do any good." "What about sealing this glowing circle?" "Sealing the..." "Why does it sound like you've heard about this?" "Because I have heard of this." Anna took another sip of coffee as Jason gave her a dumbfounded look. "I work in extermination, but I'm a horror buff in my spare time. There's all kinds of first-hand accounts with holes to other dimensions. One particular myth caught my attention a while back. It talked about insects coming in from another plane." Jason was speechless. He'd expected her to tell him he was nuts and walk out, but here she was making it sound almost reasonable. I looked deeper into it, of course, just to feel my own weird fascination with bug killing. I'll explain it like this. Imagine water running through a pipe with a hole in it. Most of the water stays in, but some trickles out into whatever room is below it. So, if there's a hole between worlds, something can spill out through it and into another one, such as moth-like creatures small enough to slip through. Jason took a large gulp from his own coffee. The situation was getting crazier by the minute. "How did I, see into this other dimension then? Did you read anything about that?" "No, but my guess is since you kind of fell into the circle, you saw through the crack. Just like peering through a hole in anything. This other being you saw, though, I've never read about. If you say it's trying to break out, maybe it's making the cracks between worlds itself." Jason shuddered again. The thought of that unknown creature spilling into his basement and bringing the world of moths with it made him want to vomit. "What can I do?" "Well, first of all," Anna began, "I'm not letting you face this alone. Secondly, what do you do when you have a hole in a pipe? You seal it with something. We've got to find out what can seal a hole between dimensions. Or at least theories on how to do it. She pulled her phone from her pocket and started researching. Jason did the same after Anna showed him certain strange websites to browse. Some were science pages, while others were downright creepy myths and chat gatherings from every part of the world. He found himself sifting through bizarre encounters with monsters of all kinds. A lot talked about cracks in reality, but none mentioned much about closing them. While he was searching, Jason heard a few rustling sounds and knew before he even looked up that some of the moths were on the ceiling. 4 of them scuttled just beside the light fixture. Jason wondered if they were somehow listening. Anna put her phone down with a clack, pulling Jason from his thoughts. "I've got an idea that might work," she said, "but it's not exactly based on fact." "At this point, I'll try anything. Let's hear it." "Okay. A lot of these sites talk about a certain energy between dimensions, kind of like the glue that holds the universe together. Energy in known science cannot be created or destroyed. It can be converted into different forms, though. What I think is happening in your basement is, somehow, a conversion of energy into a portal between worlds." Jason put his head in his hands. "How in the hell are we supposed to fix that?" "Simple. In theory, anyway. We need to convert that energy back to a seal so the hole is closed. What's the easiest way to convert energy? With heat. So what you're suggesting is that we find a way to make that glowing circle hot enough to convert the energy into patches over the cracks." "Exactly." A day ago, Jason would have called the whole conversation insane, but there he was talking about dimensional holes, monsters, and sealing energy like it was an everyday topic. What was around the house that could create a lot of heat? "I have a welding kit in the basement from when I fixed my fender," he said. "That torch can get hot. Maybe hot enough to work." "Worth a shot," Anna replied. "And we better do it as soon as possible because, well, who knows how long those cracks will hold." About 15 minutes later, they headed down the basement steps. Both wore long-sleeve shirts and pants to prevent unexpected insect attacks. A few were already circling the air above like ill omens. Jason moved slowly towards his toolkit in the far corner, and he was thankful it wasn't close to the dresser. As he threw the gloves on and pulled out the long silver torch nozzle, Anna peered through the broken part of the wall. "I see the circle," she uttered, a pang of fear in her voice. "Was it this wide when you left it?" Jason crept over to her. The circle had indeed widened, making the orange glow vivid and eerie. Anna let out a gasp as 3 moths appeared from nowhere above it, and Jason yanked her back before they could fly in her face. "This better work," he grunted, pulling a black welding mask over his head. "Wait," Anna said, stopping him before he could climb into the broken wall with the tool. She walked across the basement and came back holding an old hose. Wrapping it around Jason's waist, she tied it in a tight knot on one side. "We don't know what's going to happen while you're in there, so this is in case I have to pull you out. From anywhere you are." Jason shuddered at the thought of re-entering that nightmare place. She was right, it would be good to have a route to the real world. With her other hand, Anna reached down and picked up Dan's fallen canister of bug spray. "I'll watch your back with this. If the moth things get agitated, I'd rather be armed with something. Like I said, we do this together." "Thanks," Jason said. He squeezed her hand for a last comfort before climbing into the wall and lifting the torch kit with him. He set it down with care, taking hold of the nozzle in his hand. It was time. Jason adjusted his gases and lifted the striker. He took a deep breath, put it to the tip of the nozzle, and watched a flame cone burst forth. As he adjusted the size, he looked around for moths. Anna stood several feet away with her back turned as she gripped the spray can. No other movements. He lowered the flame as his heartbeat increased. What was about to happen? The whole thing could explode for all he knew. At last, the flame made contact with the orange circle. A sudden shockwave almost jolted the torch out of Jason's hand. The tremor passed as he held firm, and it began to feel as if he was welding something solid that wasn't his basement floor. He continued to push the flickering cone forward, careful not to touch any part of the circle with his body. "I think it's working," he whispered. Anna said nothing, but gestured a thumbs up. Her nerves must have been too on edge to speak. Jason continued welding, watching sparks fly off of what seemed like empty air. As he pushed forward, a faint glow was left in the torch's path that dimmed in seconds. Was it a sign that heat was sealing the hole? Jason took it as hope. Everything was going as planned. Then, the circle vibrated. Jason felt it and almost lost his balance. The torch clattered to the floor and went out. Another tremor came, seeming to be confined to the circle and close to it. A third was enough to make a booming sound echo through the basement. "What was that?" Anna gasped. "I don't know, but I think something knows what we're trying to do," Jason replied. He froze as several moths appeared in the air above him. They moved fast, like they were in desperation. Anna let out a shriek and blasted them with a quick burst from the canister. The insects dropped to the floor, quivering. "At least we know the poison works," she breathed. "I better put a mask on before I spray myself." Jason knew he had to hurry. His hands began to shake and beads of sweat formed as he picked the torch back up. Wait, where was the flint? He whirled around, scanning the ground for the metal object, but it was nowhere. There was only one place it could have gone. With an increasing heart rate, Jason reached into the circle and lightly felt around. Maybe by some miracle it hadn't slipped through. No such luck. As his fingertips made contact in one spot, a brief sensation of falling came, and the flint appeared like it had been sitting there the whole time. Jason knew it hadn't been. He knew he had slipped between the cracks once more. As he raised his head, he found himself back in a nightmare. The mountains of moths were there, but they were frenzied, masses of them tumbling over each other like churning tides. To Jason's horror, some of them vanished as they hit the circle edge. Were they all about to slip into his basement? A nausea came over him as fear shook his body to the core. He grabbed the striker and backed up, overcome by the sight of the hellish dimension filled with squirming moths trying to break into his world. The only thing that pulled him out of it was a voice. It was Anna, sounding as far away as possible. "Jason, if you can hear me, I can't see you anymore," she shouted. "Hurry! The moths are coming more frequently now." He opened his mouth to reply, but was stopped by another horrifying sight. A familiar shape appeared in the mounds of insects and barreled towards the circle like a wave. Jason let out a scream as the shape crashed into the invisible barrier, shaking everything. He still couldn't make out the full sight of the creature. The thing backed off and rammed again, driving home the fact that Jason had little time left. In a state of surreal numbness, Jason struck the flint and reignited the torch. The flame burst forth with a hiss and cast shadows across the swarms surrounding the tiny circle of space. This only increased the hysteria of the moths, and the masses fluttered quicker, reminding Jason of the static from an old TV. He tried to block out the fear as he returned to his work. As the flame made contact with the opposite end of the circle, another tremendous crash came from right behind the invisible barrier. Jason suddenly found himself staring into a dark orb. It was an eye, larger than his head and black as coal, fixating on the tiny light from the welding torch. The thing backed off into the moth waves and charged at the barrier again, but this time there was a ripping sound of thick fabric separating. Jason screamed louder than he ever had before as an insectoid appendage reached into the circle. The black eye reappeared on the other side, and the hairy limb started grabbing towards him. It hung there like it had crashed through a window and was stuck partway through, struggling to push further in. The creature was trying to catch him. "Anna!" Jason cried. "Pull me out!" He waited to feel a tug on the hose tied to his chest, but it didn't come. In some distant place he heard her scream. That's when he noticed the multitude of moths slipping out from around the insect arm. Each one disappeared into the invisible crack between dimensions. Anna was under attack. Both of them were on their own. The huge gray arm darted around, and Jason could only hunker down and clutch the still blazing torch. His welding was visible now, lines weaving through the circle that were incomplete at the very edge. All Jason had to do was finish the connection and the seal would be complete. The thought crossed his mind that he couldn't finish the job there. What if it sealed the hole while he was still in it? He could be trapped between worlds forever. Jason shivered as he lay flat on his stomach, praying that the roving limb wouldn't grab him and whatever was happening in the world he knew would be survivable. He started grasping around the ground, trying to imitate the same action that had returned him the first time. Nothing. He slid his hand on every space he could reach. Nothing. He reached for the hose trailing behind him. It moved. Scrambling towards the spot the end of the hose vanished at, he thrust his hand forward and saw it disappear. That's when he made a mistake. In his feverish thrill, Jason jumped up. His excitement turned to dread as something firm closed around his waist. The monstrous being had him in its grasp. Jason felt himself get hoisted off the ground, struggling all he could against the unseen creature's grip. All around, the moths continued to frenzy, and the terrible black eye emerged again, staring at its captured prey without mercy. Suddenly there was a tug on the hose. Something was pulling the other end. It had to be Anna. Both the arm and the hose pulled at Jason in a tug of war. By a small stroke of luck, Jason's skin was protected from the disgusting limb by all the coverings. There was hope. "Pull harder, this thing's got me!" Jason yelled. "Hold on!" came a still distant scream. Each side struggled and pulled as the creature roared and the moths danced. The entire horde looked like it would burst through at any moment. Just as the beast gained more ground, Jason ripped the flint out of his pocket and attempted to relight the torch for a third time. Come on," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Jason, I'm losing my grip," Anna cried. Jason struck again and again as the arm pulled him further towards the waves of moths. Finally, the flame burst forward just as his body was about to touch the invisible barrier. With a war cry, Jason thrust the flame into the hairy limb and watched it start to smoke. A roar of pain came from the creature as it released him. He tumbled to the floor as the appendage thrashed around. "Anna!" Jason screamed, and as the smoking arm made one last lunge at him, he felt the hose pull him towards the other side. There was a flash, and suddenly he was in his basement again. With no time to think, he threw himself towards the circle and started finishing the seal. The orange sphere shook as sparks flew in every direction. Jason felt like an earthquake was happening, as roaring continued to rattle through his eardrums. He couldn't see it, but he knew the creature was slamming itself against the crack between worlds again and again. Then, as quick as it started, everything stopped. Jason took off his welding mask, his breath straining and his heart pounding. The circle below him was no longer glowing. It looked like someone had drawn it with a piece of chalk. He looked around, and there Anna stood near the crack in the wall, breathing just as hard as he was. Dead moths lay scattered across the floor in piles. Both stayed in silence for a moment before embracing each other in a hug. "They were flowing out so fast," Anna choked. "I almost ran out of poison. What happened in there?" "It's all right. It's done," Jason said, continuing to hug her. "It's done. And you saved me. I would have never made it back here without you." "I did what I could. Are you sure it worked?" The floor looked normal, aside from the hole in the wall. The circle had quickly faded, the impression becoming barely visible at all. "I hope so," Jason said. After carefully sweeping up the insect remains and putting them in a tight-sealed trash bag, Jason let Anna out his front door. "Are we going to tell anybody about this?" he asked. Anna shook her head. "I wouldn't speak about it in normal conversations. Don't worry, I'm going to type up everything we learned and put it on one of those websites we looked at. That's where people would search for it anyway." "And Dan?" "I'm still taking his van to him at the hospital. I'll tell him we took care of the problem." "Okay. Thank you. For everything." Anna smiled. "Next time you visit, maybe we can do something a little more normal." Jason shut the door as the van pulled out of the driveway. He plopped down on his couch and exhaled, running over all that had happened in the past few days. He knew the sound of that creature trying to pound through worlds would echo in his mind for a long time. Would the makeshift seal really hold? These thoughts were interrupted when, in the corner of Jason's sight, a shadow flickered across the ceiling. His heart skipped a beat and he stood up to see. A regular old moth dinging against the light bulb. He let out a sigh and waited until the moth fluttered lower. Then Jason smacked it out of the air and stomped it with his foot until it became a brown smudge on the carpet. There would be no taking chances. Hello once again, this is Matt Aldrich, and thanks for listening to the second half of the story. If you enjoyed it and are hungry for more, check out the rest of the channel and consider subscribing to get notified about future ones. But you already knew that. Twitter link is in the description for updates and other stuff. I'll see you next time, after I've checked the basement for interdimensional portals. Take care, friends.